Great to have everyone here joining us, albeit digitally, but even better that we can zoom in from literally anywhere throughout the country. Very accessible event. We are filming the session. It's being recorded just now, so if you don't want to be on screen, please just turn your camera off just now. We've got a couple of great speakers coming up. As you can see, I'm not Jane. Jane Chappell, who works with Social Enterprise Scotland, was going to do the welcome and frame the context of the census in the action plan and Scottish Government's 10-year commitment to supporting social enterprise. But I'm going to do that in the first instance and then pass on to our speakers. But I think most of you will know that the Scottish Government published a 10-year strategy, really co-produced with the sector back in 2016. And it is our strategy. Scottish Government put their stamp on it to ensure it got buy-in from the ministers. And I'm sure at the time it was one of the only 10-year strategies as well, and really showed a commitment from Scottish Government to embed social enterprise into the future to change Scotland's economy. And one of the outputs in the first action plan, which was pretty much a wish list from the sector, I think, if I remember correctly, about 91 actions were committed to, and one of them was to really capture the data from the social enterprise sector to really create an evidence base effectively to show decision makers, etc., the power behind social enterprise as a model. There are going to be, pardon me, 3 action plans. The second's a little more refined. I think the primary difference between the first and the second was the first really had to lay the foundations for a bit of a context, especially for the readership, because not suggesting it's the the document we all go to, but there's a lot of decision makers will understand the context behind the 10-year strategy and how it needs to be integrated and woven through Scottish Government policy making agendas. So I think the second one really tried to, I guess, just remove some of the structural barriers around making sure that social enterprise is embedded across Scottish Government directorates. It's so easy, even I'm sure in our organisations, to work in silos, and we find that the way to move these big structural barriers, essentially encouraging the public sector to catch up with social enterprise, was to create a strategy, pardon me, the second action plan that really had buy-in from different directorates across Scottish Government. I'm sure you all know the 3 themes and priorities that emerged from the social enterprise strategy was stimulating social enterprise, developing stronger organisations, and the third one was realising market opportunity. And the second action plan, Scottish Government brought together the funded organisations to help deliver the strategy. The groups established 4 subgroups, 2 of which you're about to hear from later in the session, with particularly thematic areas that we're looking to address with the sector. The 4 are social impact, net zero, equality, diversity, inclusion, and fair work. And I'd say the group also looks to influence other areas of government, with social enterprise playing a pivotal role in delivering key outcomes in the National Performance Framework. This is one of my favourite sessions on the census. Back in 2015, the group got together and Social Value Lab were commissioned to do a piece of work. And what I love about this piece of work is it's co-produced. Social Value Lab don't go away into a room with all the data and come back to us with a fait accompli. They take the action plan group along with them, a subgroup, just to sense check it, to suggest where it could be refined. Does it make sense? It's obviously made up of a number of data sets. One of the most important ones being the survey that the 900, and I'm sure Jonathan will correct me, 86 organisations filled in. But without further ado, gives me great pleasure to introduce a friend who I've probably not seen in real life for too long. But Jonathan Coburn, if you want to tell us a bit about the methodology of how the census came about, we can't wait to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Speaking about methodology, glutton for punishment there, but really, for those that haven't managed to get through to page 98 of the report, really just to say some words on the really the process behind the census and some of the story coming out of it. It's clear that over the last 2 years, things have changed quite a lot for most businesses, most organizations, and the census project this year tried to capture the essence of really that very uncertain and difficult period that most social enterprises find themselves in. So really the project itself, what we were trying to do is look at the scale, the characteristics, the impact and the needs of the sector as it's evolved now since 2015, and tried to carry that out in a way that is consistent. It allows for some longitudinal tracking, really, of these core characteristics that enable us to report on the growth and significance of the sector. So there were four main parts to that process that we flexed a little bit in terms of the timeline, just to make sure that we were able to capture that significant COVID period. The work was carried out before the war in Ukraine, the energy crisis, cost of living, and all of the other things that we're grappling at the moment. But I think it's a really helpful story of how the sector has come through that very turbulent time. So those four elements really started with the identification of social enterprises, and that started in April 21. That's just about a year after the first national lockdown, where we looked at, I think, 25,000 organizations, compiled data from different sources, from the Charities Regulator, Companies House, and others, really, to make sense of what this potential group of social enterprises was, and update the database to give us a first level indication of the active group of social enterprises there around mid-year 2021. From there, then we did, as Chris mentioned, carry out quite a large-scale survey of the sector. In terms of timeline, again, that happened in around October 21. And if you remember way back then, that was the period that we were just coming out of that main phase of the pandemic. Things were starting to normalize. And I think the job retention program at the time had just come to an end. So as part of that survey, we gathered the views of, I don't know, Chris, was it 983? It was around 950, I think, organizations. And that helped us understand a little bit of the characteristics, attitudes, and needs of the sector. And this time round, we really drilled down into the experience of COVID a little bit. And there were some new questions explored around equalities as well as net zero, which James and Alistair, I think, are going to pick up on in just a moment. So after identification survey, then we carried out a full financial assessment that looked at publicly available financial statements from around 13,000 social enterprises, and we extracted data from about 5,500. That's almost 9 in every 10 social enterprises that we got financial information on. And the point here is that it's very objective data, and it does cover the vast majority of social enterprises. So there's a very rich picture that we can build up from that financial assessment. And an important point is that we did delay the analysis of that information probably for about 6 to 8 months. What we were finding was that a lot of the financial statements weren't being filed with Companies House or the charity regulator, given the flexibility and uncertainty during COVID. So what we wanted to do was capture the bulk of financial data as it related to that sort of core period during the pandemic, so we could really get to grips with what was happening to the sector in terms of financial performance and health. And then it was really just a case of pulling together all of that information as we get into sort of middle of 2022. Looking at both financial performance as well as economic contribution in terms of employment, GVA, and social impact. So a very sort of detailed and rigorous period of hard work by the team at Social Value Lab. Not me, of course, but we do have some staff that are still recovering from that process. It is a rigorous piece of work, but I think it's also important to point out that there are some limitations. In anything like this, there's a degree of professional judgment. Social enterprise, we've all got a slightly different perspective on what it means to be a social enterprise or to conduct social enterprise activity. So what we include, what we exclude, you know, there's a degree of interpretation. There is no single legal definition, organizational form, single regulator. So all we can offer here is to try and stick as closely as possible to those broad working criteria that were agreed, and to be consistent now over the 4 periods of the census, just to make sure that we're capturing the same data in the same ways from largely the same group of organizations. There's also a point here that we don't necessarily capture all social enterprise activity, in the sense that there are some very new social enterprises getting off the ground that maybe haven't registered at the point at which the census occurs. There are also many social enterprises headquartered outside of Scotland that might be conducting activity in the country. So at the margins, you know, you could include some more activity or exclude it, but the vast bulk of activity we are capturing. And the final limitation really is that the objective financial data, it is partial in a sense, albeit, you know, we've got 90% of that data, and it is open to a degree of interpretation, but it is reasonably full in extent. It is a lagging indicator in the sense that, you know, financial information always is from the year past. But we've now waited long enough in the process to get the most detailed and accurate financial information. So that's really the process that we went through, and what we found then was quite a sort of rich and detailed picture from this group of, I think it was 6,047 social enterprises that were active in that particular period. What did we find then? Well, there's clearly some foundations of the social enterprise sector, some characteristics, some things that really don't change much over a period of 7 to 8 years. We know that social enterprises tend to operate in much the same fields. That doesn't vary much, but it does at the margins. So we know that there remain the bulk of activity in terms of managing community buildings, arts activities, childcare activities, health and social care related services. We know about the important contribution that social enterprises makes, particularly to rural Scotland, where again we see a very significant amount of activity and densely concentrated in particularly island and remote rural communities. We know that social enterprise remains small. Most organisations have an income of certainly less than £100,000 each year, and about 2 in 5 don't have a turnover of more than £50,000. So quite small scale, but also quite localised in a way, in the sense that around a quarter of organisations don't deliver services or activity outside of their immediate neighbourhood or community, and around half outside of their council boundaries. So If we think about the services we come in contact with day to day, whether that's your local credit union or childcare service or the community theatre that you go to or community centre you go to at the weekends, it's all very localized, and there are only a relatively small number of social enterprises that where turnover does run into millions. What the report also shows us are some longer term trends that are now reasonably clear. We do see an overall growth in the sector, both in terms of number and in terms of financial strength. The sector's grown from about 5,200 social enterprises in 2015 up to just over 6,000 today. So on the face of it, a large growth, but also a turnover in organisations of about 10% every 2 years. And in the latest period, which covers the bulk of that period of the pandemic, we see that growth almost stalled, just a net growth of 22 social enterprises during that period, albeit over 600 registered and about 600 deregistered. So quite a bit of churn, but this sort of long-term period of growth of the sector. We also see social enterprises taking slightly different forms. We see the continued emergence of community interest companies, so SCIOs, certainly different legal forms that are starting to emerge. We see more and more social enterprises now operating in consumer markets. And we see an increasing diversity, both in the way that social enterprises look, the way that they behave. And if we look at something like female leadership, which is a statistic often quoted, we see a growth of 60% female leaders up to 70, over 70% today, which compares to around 14% among small businesses. So some things to be very proud of, and some continued trends there. And this time round, we did actually learn quite a bit about the experience during COVID, and there's certainly lots that you can dig into in the report. In terms of the experience itself, it's fair to say that it was a really negative 2 years for organisations. Around 70% viewed it as negative, around 1 in 5 viewed it actually as having some benefit or positive outcome during the period. Also, it was a period characterised by growing demand. At the start, we saw lots of survey evidence that showed that demand and expectation was growing on social enterprises, and coming out of the pandemic, we also see that demand, that ripple effect of demand, increased for about 2 in 5 social enterprises that we're seeing increased demand. About 2 in 5 we're also seeing an increased number of beneficiaries 18 months after that initial lockdown. So very great pressures on the sector. And if we dig into the report, we see a lot about the changes in working practices, the changes in approaches. The organisations began to make sense of what was going on and began to shift focus and do things slightly differently. In there's also a lot about the mitigating actions that we saw, where organisations attempted to stay afloat through doing things differently, through cutting, reducing, changing services. And I think the figure was around 2/3 secured access to emergency funds from government during that period, a very large injection of around 350 million in a very short period of time, which did help the sector to stay afloat. But I think if you really dig into the report, the sort of picture that occurs to me is a very sort of choppy ocean. And if you imagine a large boat and a small boat, well, the larger organizations tended to steer a steadier course during that period, were able to make those shifts, were able to adapt, whereas it was the smaller, perhaps more fragile social enterprises that were much more buffeted around by conditions at the time, almost twice as likely as the largest social enterprises to report a negative experience of COVID, 3 times as likely to report a financial loss during that period and reduced income. So a very difficult experience for many social enterprises, but a more straightforward one perhaps for the larger ones. And finally, I think what we see is the sector coming out of that COVID period in late 21 into 22 and fairly good health. If we look at income, that was around 5 billion again, and indeed had increased about 10% since we looked at that in 2019. A lot of that obviously was that added injection of grant funding over the period, but there was a real uplift in trading income despite really difficult conditions during that period. In terms of the bottom line, around $500 million in surplus to the sector, which again is a great achievement, and potentially a temporary spike in surplus or profitability for the sector as it come out of COVID, as costs were reduced, spending delayed somewhat or put off completely, and as a lot of the big costs for the sector were picked up in terms of wage subsidy, in terms of increasing flexibility in grants, which meant that a lot of the surplus could be carried into the following year. So the financial cushion remained there for the sector, and that support from government, I think quite clearly allowed the sector really to absorb a lot of that financial shock during the period. And really, towards the end of that period, then what we see is a really strong balance sheet, about 7 billion sitting on the balance sheet of social enterprises, and quite a remarkable sort of engine for growth there in the sector. What we see is every 2 years, about 1 billion in net worth growing in the sector. So a fairly steady picture there since 2015. And also, I think really importantly, a stable employment picture where we see around 90,000 employees still in the sector as we come out of 2021 into 2022. And just a 2% growth there. But during that period, I think we saw just over half of social enterprises place staff in furlough, but only 1 in 10 introduce necessary redundancies. So overall, what we see is a reasonably positive picture. But again, when you dig beneath the surface, you know, many small, fragile organizations go through quite a difficult period. And as we sort of look towards the future, as we went into 2022, you know, still a great degree of confidence among organizations, and the changed ways of working really taken hold within the sector, and great confidence about moving forward. So now you don't have to get to page 98 in the report, and that's really just my sort of nutshell summary of the report for anyone that doesn't really want to do all the hard work in reading.
Jonathan, thank you so much for that. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone. That was an excellent overview of the 98-page report, and we appreciate you bringing that to us. We've asked Martin Avila to moderate a panel session after this, so we would like you to stay around and maybe answer questions on the methodology or the findings or some of the analysis that you've shared with us, and we look forward to hearing some of that. So if you've got any questions, Martin can start compiling some notes. If you want to put them in the chat function for Jonathan, and I guess we want to pay attention to James' presentation as well, because James Finney is a business consultant for CEIS, and James chairs the net zero subgroup for I've just seen your job title change. I just went on LinkedIn to, but you know, James is a team leader.
You can call me anything, Chris. Don't worry, I'll answer to anything.
Good man. So we look forward to hearing your presentation. Over to you, James.
Okay, thanks very much, Chris, and thanks to Jonathan as well for a great intro. As Chris said, I work for CEIS, and CEIS is the chair of the Social Enterprise Action Plan subgroup on net zero. In addition to that, there is a wider third sector net zero working group. So, and those groups have been coming together really for the last couple of years. So Scotland's got an ambitious climate change legislation target for net zero emissions of all greenhouse gases by 2045. As many of you, I'm sure, will be aware of, looking to end Scotland's contribution to climate change within one generation. Today, what I want to do is discuss the census findings on net zero readiness and give you an update on the work that we're going to do to help support the social enterprise and the wider third sector on their net zero journey. So looking at the census findings, on a positive note, the latest survey findings suggest that about 84% of social enterprises are taking some form of action to reduce or offset their greenhouse gas emissions. And also in the last 20 months, that 35% of social enterprises have actually increased their activity around this area, including things like increasing recycling, reducing energy consumption, reducing the purchase of consumables, and also switching to natural and more recyclable materials. At the same time as making that progress, environmental sustainability is the second top form of support in demand by social enterprises indicated within the census, with 41% of respondents indicating a need for more support in this space. So when we look at it there in the left-hand table, what we see is that the survey explored the preparedness of the sector and found that there's quite a lot still to do, with 51% of organisations reporting that they are not so well prepared or at all prepared for the transition to net zero. When we look at the table on the right-hand side, what we see is that the findings indicate a number of forms of support required to help social enterprises feel better prepared. And those support areas include the need for better funding to implement actions, the need for providing more information, expert support, peer learning, and case studies. So we've got a clear indication now of where the sector is in regards to net zero readiness, and also in regards to their thoughts moving forward and the support that they would like to see. If you move to the next slide, Georgie. So what we have done is we're taking a collaborative approach to actually responding to this. And what we have done through the net zero working group, and as I said, there's a wider social third sector working group as well, is we've brought together a range of third sector organisations representative of both the social enterprise and the wider third sectors. So CEIS chairs that group, but also you see from the wider third sector, SCVO's representation in there. Voluntary Action North Lanarkshire represents each of the 32 third sector interfaces. We've got representation from the communities part of the sector with SCAN, with Scottish Community Alliance, Scottish Communities Finance, as well as a number of the intermediary organisations providing support within the social enterprise sector, like Community Enterprise, DTA Scotland, and Firstport. So really what we've done is bring a whole range of third sector organisations and social enterprise support agencies together under that one group, and understanding how can we collectively come together to define how we can respond to the net zero challenge moving forward. In addition to that, in the last year or so, we've also engaged with the Scottish Funders Forum. So not just looking at it in regards to third sector organisations or the bodies that support the third sector and social enterprise sector, but also those who fund the sector as well. And in having that dialogue with the Scottish Funders Forum, what was quite clear is that they were also understanding and looking at how can they help their grantees to respond to the net zero journey. So collectively, what we now have is organisations, support bodies and funders coming together, looking at this from a collaborative approach, understanding how can we have a collaborative solution to addressing the net zero challenge. Go to the next slide, please, Georgie. Thank you. So what we've done is we've done a lot of work on understanding what it is we wanted to do here, both, as I said, with the working group and also with the funders. And we've set a clear aim, which is to try and deliver a coordinated response across the social enterprise and wider third sector that provides organisations with a range of resources and tools to help them to develop an appropriate response to meeting Scotland's target date of 2045. In doing that, what we'd like to do is enable Scotland's third sector organisations to recognise the relevance of climate change to their own individual missions, confidently describe how they are going to take action that addresses that, and also to find opportunities to embed and amplify climate-related benefits into their core work. This shouldn't just not be a box-ticking exercise. It's about how we can actually embed benefits of making the journey towards net zero within the core mission and services that are delivered by the organisations. Go to the next slide, please, Georgie. So in doing that, what we've done is we did quite a bit of work in scoping out what the key principles that any solution should deliver. And we've tried to be very mindful of the fact that the sector is wide, the sector is varied, as Jonathan has given an indication of the profile of the sector, the size and scale, from the very small to those larger organisations. So what we're trying to do is set out some key principles that can serve the sector as a whole. We want any solution to be clear, simple, relatable, and offer an easy starting point. It allows organisations to progress at their own pace. It's suitable for organisations no matter what size, what location, what resources you have, or what subsector you come from. A solution that was going to grow and evolve over time as the needs and resources increase. It's going to be cost effective and also align with the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, Corporate Accounting and Reporting Standards. And GHG is the main global standard for public and private sector entities and globally. If you go to the next solution, please, Georgie. Okay, so the solution that we're in the process of developing, as part of this work, we reviewed 54 organisations and service providers who are providing some form of net zero support that could be available to the third sector organisations. Some of that support could be paid, some of it was free, some of it was sector thematic, some of it was based upon if you're in the public sector or third sector. So there's a whole range of support mechanisms out there. What we found that there was actually no off-the-shelf solution that we thought was going to be suitable to actually help the third sector collectively to take that net zero journey. So what we've done is we've decided to go and use the best practice that we found elsewhere and build on that. And we're now working with two service providers. The first one is Going Green Together, which was a solution developed in the northeast of England and also in Cumbria, and also an organisation based in Glasgow, a Scottish Edge winner called Small 99. And we're working with them collectively to develop a solution that's going to provide a range of incremental tools and resources for the sector. First of all, there's going to be an information website, and that's where organisations can go to and find the most relevant information in regards to net zero for the sector and just be informed by that, just find out more. Secondly, there's going to be a scorecard That scorecard is very much an initial check and balance of where an organisation sits in its journey towards net zero. It will be a 3 to 5 minute survey, and from that survey it'll give you a scorecard with a range of actions, suggested actions across thematic areas, and that will really help organisations to take that first step in a very light touch way. Further to that, then, as we get more and deeper into the process, there's a detailed action planner that's going to help organisations look at this and break it down into each of the thematic areas. What we're going to be doing in there is then aligning that action planner with the current Scottish support ecosystem within net zero. So if there are funders, if there are support programmes in specific areas, it could be about energy, it could be about sustainable transport, it could be about food, or whatever it may be, then we'll incorporate and embed that within there as well, so that there's a very much a tailored solution available to action planning. And then lastly, on reporting, there'll be a standardised reporting output from that tool. And what we are discussing just now, for example, with some of the funders, is that reporting standard would then be accepted by the funders as a mechanism from grantees to show that the progress they're making on net zero. The timelines for doing this is that the website and scorecard will be available from, we're looking at in 3 months' time, in April, the start of the new financial year. And then the further development will happen where the action planner and reporting tool will be available from later in autumn in 2023. Next slide, please, Georgie. Thank you. Last slide from me. So two working groups have been formed. We've got an advisory group, which has representations from the working group, but also the Scottish Funders Forum as well, and that's going to provide oversight and input as we develop that new solution. And then we've got a user group, and the user group is from third sector organisations across Scotland who are prepared to come on board and help to test the new solution, provide feedback on applicability to them as individuals, organisations, looking at it by different subsector, size, geography, thematic area, so that we can get a true representation of the sector across all areas. And the commitment that we're looking for is, we're signing up organisations just now to the user group. It's 3 2-hour sessions over the next 3 months, and there's an online sign up, and there's also an email sign up to Beth, who is our collaborative partner at SCVO. So if anyone's interested in participating in that, we'd love to get you on board. Okay, hopefully that gives you a kind of flavour, a snapshot of the work that we're doing in net zero, and I'll be happy to take any questions at the end.
Thank you, James. That was very comprehensive. And yeah, George just said that you can share the link as well in the email follow-up. But maybe, George, if you can cut and paste it into the chat, people can join up by the end of the day. If you do have any questions for James, put them in the chat and we'll hold them all for the end, because we're about to hear from Alistair Davis, who is CEO of Social Investment Scotland, and he chairs the Equality, Diversity, Inclusion subgroup for the Action Plan CEIS group. So over to you, Alistair.
Thanks very much, Chris, and good afternoon, everybody. It's good to be here this afternoon to share a little bit about the early stages of the working group, which I've got the real honour and privilege of chairing, actually, for the Scottish Government, looking at equality, diversity and inclusion, which I think we would all recognise as a complex topic, but we've got to start somewhere, and it's good to be able to do that in the context of this particular working group. Originally, the working group was set up alongside the Social Enterprise Action Plan, particularly to look at an action in that plan related to simply around about the diversity of boards. But based on feedback from that action plan working group, the group's actually been established with a much wider remit than that. And at this stage in our early work, we're looking at equality, diversity and inclusion in all its forms in order to be able to inform the next steps of our work. Now, it's important to recognise the fact that we have a range of members that are part of the group. The membership of the group is confidential for good reason. We're not there, we're not appointed to the group to represent any particular group. So I am a gay man, but I am certainly not on the group to represent the views of the entire LGBTQ plus community. That is not my role. I'm on the group to bring my own lived experience of having protected characteristics, and that's the same for everybody that is on the group. And that was very important for me as we brought together the different people to bring in those perspectives, that they were able to do so in a very trusted and in a confidential way and in a safe space that allowed people to share their perspectives and their experiences. And at the moment, we're working through the exploration of various different themes and also learning from best practice around about EDI from other parts of the UK. And that work will allow us to inform an initial set of recommendations back to Scottish Government and the Action Plan Working Group. Now, one of the first things that you would do when investigating a particular area, particularly related to EDI, is to look at data and where data is available. And of course, we have been able to look at EDI data through the Social Enterprise Census for a number of years now. And it has obviously been a theme of the data that has been collected to date. Now, I think that we had Social Value Lab along to one of our earlier meetings, and were able to have a good conversation about the data that is collected around about EDI so far. And although that has made good progress over the last few years in successive editions of the census, I think the group were quite cognizant of the fact that what we produce at the moment does have certain limitations. However, we do appreciate that you've got to start somewhere. I think the group recognised that so far through the census, there has been a focus in particular on looking at female leadership of social enterprise. And it is, of course, fantastic to see that there has been a positive trend in terms of the number of social enterprises that are run by females or have a female in a controlling a role, a sort of leadership role. However, that is a relatively one-dimensional way to look at diversity. And one of the things that the group is particularly keen to look at in future editions of the census in terms of data collection is actually to understand the spread of that particular indicator across organisations of different sizes, because there is a sense that in smaller social enterprises, the incidence of female leadership would be much greater than it is within larger social enterprises, and that's something that the group would be particularly keen to understand in terms of future editions of the census. I want to just provide 3 comments in terms that from our perspective as a group, in terms of what came out of our session around about the census. And these are meant to be constructive for the future rather than in any way critical of what has happened so far. Firstly, we suspect that there has been a bit of a tendency in the past to positively compare social enterprise to the private sector purely because of some of the diversity indicators that have emerged from the census, particularly around about female leadership. It is our belief that that's probably quite a dangerous comparison. And whereas the indicator does show a higher level of female leadership within social enterprises, diversity comes in a whole range of different forms. And certainly we would be wary about holding ourselves up as a sector that has got everything right when it comes to EDI, because that certainly does not feel like it is the case when you're on the ground. Secondly, we also had some concerns about the methods of data collection as part of the census. Now, this is acknowledged within the census report, but there are some data points that rely on the person that is completing the survey making assumptions about the diversity of their teams or their organisation. And this is inappropriate, actually, when it comes down to certain protected characteristics, particularly around about sexuality and gender identity. If it was a true census, everybody within organisations would be filling it in, but we do rely on often one person within an organisation filling in the survey, perhaps without the benefit of having carried out a detailed diversity survey about everybody within that organisation. So some of that does cause us some concern and would be something that we would want to be looked at a bit more carefully in the future. And thirdly, the work is all focused on making recommendations around about future data, and we do very much recognise and welcome the willingness on the part of the Scottish Government to involve the EDI subgroup in terms of some of the design of the census and future editions of the specification. We are very much interested in hearing from people about perspectives. So if you would like to reach out to me to share your experience, then we're happy to receive that feedback. If you don't feel comfortable having a conversation with me, then I can pass you on to another member of the subgroup with their permission. However, I'd like to end by saying I'm certain that one of the recommendations that we'll be making back to the social enterprise sector is best practice around about the organisation of events, and making sure that when events are organised, that there is a diversity of speakers on the panel. And I have broken one of my own rules today by participating in a session where panel speakers are all male. But given that I am here to share feedback in terms of the work of an equality and diversity subgroup, I thought it was important that I did continue to participate in the session. But certainly that's a wee preview into one of the main recommendations that will come out of our early work. And I'm obviously happy to take questions at the end of the session as well.
Thank you, Alistair. Thank you all the speakers as well. That was excellent. And you know, the irony is not lost on me either, but you know, it's 72% of social enterprises are run by women, and there's 4 men talking this afternoon. As I said, unfortunately, it was a shame Jane couldn't be here, but you know, I do believe in systems change, and that's one of the things I'm sure the EDI group will be addressing. I will hand over to another man, Martin Avila. He's the Chief Exec of CEIS, to moderate the panel questions at the end. So if anyone has any questions for James, Alistair, Jonathan is still here as well, please fire them on, and I'll leave you in Martin's capable hands. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Chris. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining us, and to the folks that have agreed to join the panel session today. I'll probably just start off with going to the questions that are in the chat and just inviting everybody to please either put questions in the chat or to put their hands up. And I'll start by kind of grasping the nettle with the issue that you highlighted there on the way out, Alistair. So we've got a question in from Pauline from Scottish Community Finance, saying that, you know, given during the session today that we've got 4 men up in the panel, you know, if it's okay to ask you this question, what do you think, or what are some of the thoughts that are going around the EDI subgroup for the action plan on what more we need to do to promote female leadership on a public stage?
Yeah, thanks, Martin. Sorry, I was so busy typing that I didn't actually catch Alistair or indeed Chris saying they recognise what it was. So I've kind of been, my legs have been cut from under me by getting recognition of it. But no, but I think there has to be and I mean, there clearly is. We just have to be much more aware that we have to have a greater diversity, you know, on platforms. And really, we shouldn't automatically be going to men, and we shouldn't be automatically going to white men, and we shouldn't be automatic. There should be inbuilt in all of us, actually, that if there's an alternative, then it should be an alternative. And I think that needs to be part, perhaps, of a diversity strategy or approach to inclusion, whereby we actually put it in and say we are committed to making sure. So there's stuff I think we could all be taking at a local level, but I appreciate that Alistair and Chris has just kind of, you know, got there before me, but that's okay. As long as we're all acknowledging it, that's fine.
Thanks, Pauline. Alistair, what work have the subgroup been doing, or what thoughts are starting to emerge there?
So obviously recognised Polly's comments in the chat and was saying the same thing as she was recognising that. It's not something we've specifically spoken about. I think it's an easy recommendation that the group could make back to the broader social enterprise sector, particularly for those organisations that are involved with organising events. I have to say it's not something that I would normally say is a problem across the social enterprise sector. I think certainly normally we would make a good job at this, and I'm not having a go at anybody that's been involved in the organisation of this particular event because it was identified up front. I'm not calling anybody out in the context of the particular session today. But the responsibility relies on those people that are involved in participating in events. And if you're asked to participate in an event, then it's your responsibility to ask who else is on the panel. And if you are a white man, then there's a responsibility to perhaps step back or volunteer to step back to allow a more diverse voice to participate and have their own voice amplified as part of a panel discussion. So I think that responsibility lies on each one of us when you're being invited to participate in an event.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Alistair. We've got a couple of technical questions that have come in for yourself, Jonathan. Just starting off, one there from David from the Social Enterprise Academy. How can we be sure that it's not just a case of us finding more social enterprises rather than more social enterprises actually having been created?
Yeah, I guess, Martin, the main comment would be that we do systematically go back to the source information, looking at all regulated charities and companies in Scotland. So anything that registers and moves, it's on our radar and we do look at it. So it's not just looking at the usual suspects, those organisations that respond to a survey or those that present themselves as social enterprises. Indeed, I think what we find is that between 55 and 60% of organisations included in the social enterprise census don't actually describe themselves as social enterprises. So if we think about a group running a community hall or a community theatre or a childcare organisation, they don't actually use the language of social enterprise. So I think that's a very important point. We're fairly agnostic about what organisations call themselves. What we're looking at is those characteristics that define social enterprise and are fairly rigorous about identifying them as such.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jonathan. And I've got another technical question here from Craig. I don't know if you're able to come in, Craig, just to make sure that I get this correct, but essentially asking around one of the organisations identified in one of the annexes. I don't see everybody on my screen. Are you there, Craig? So I think what Craig's asking is within that annex, Jonathan, it talks about all the organisations examined in the studies, and it's asking, is that all the social enterprises identified by local authority area rather than just the sample of social enterprises that responded to the survey?
It should be, Martin. Yeah, all social enterprises should be in there.
Fantastic. Happy days. A question for yourself, James, on the net zero aspect. Do we have any idea of the complete carbon output for social enterprises in Scotland yet?
Easy answer, no. It's actually quite funny. When we looked at this as an advisory group, and also when we met with the Scottish Funders Forum, when we looked at being clear about identifying the principles and the characteristics that any solution that was going to be developed should have, one of the things that actually came out very clearly was there was no prioritisation on carbon calculation. And that might surprise some people. And it's simply because we felt that the sector as a whole, we wanted to bring people on a journey. We recognise that, as you would see from the survey findings, the census findings, that some people have started that journey, but ultimately there's a long way to go. And we didn't want to put carbon calculation right at the front of that discussion. We wanted to help people access resources in an accessible way, depending upon what stage they were at and really understand that this is going to be an evolving picture year on year. And at this point in time, there's no requirement from the majority of the organisations and funders in Scottish Government to provide a carbon calculation. So as much as that will be part of the process moving forward, it's not upfront at this point in time. We want to give people an easy starting point that they can put in practical steps that makes it absolutely accessible to them and recognisable to them, and build on that in an iterative way moving forward.
Fantastic, thanks, James. One thing that we can't do at the minute is change the folks that are on the panel. One thing we can do is open up a space for anybody else that's in the room today that would like to offer any reflections on the social enterprise survey. And I'm particularly looking to folks who are not old white men. I think I'm in the old bracket now as well, so unfortunately. So is there anybody else in the room that would like to give us any of their reflections on the social enterprise survey, so that we've at least opened up the platform a little bit to a more diverse range of voices? You don't have to all volunteer at once. Sorry for putting you on the spot, folks. I'm just going to wait here in awkward silence for another 30 seconds.
I'm quite happy to say something.
Thanks, Sophie.
I thought the points were brought up by both Alistair and Pauline were very interesting, but I also wondered about what we do about changing the leadership of the support agencies as well. Sorry for you guys who are the white males heading them all up. There's something for me in amongst all of that as well, because the census quite clearly shows that the largest number of social enterprises are led or female led in some way or another. So we need to do something about the support agencies having the change in that as well. From my perspective, I think it's very useful to have had all the information, and I really do appreciate the synopsis that was given by Jonathan and the PDF that we all got as well, which I'd seen before, because it does demonstrate how economically viable and important social enterprise is across the whole of Scotland. I think we should be doing more about shouting about that. I realise that's a difficult thing to do, and there's that issue about the rural side of stuff as well. But I just want to say thanks everybody for participating in the census, and I think it's really important we keep going with it. But there is something around about the female leadership side that requires some work.
Thanks, Sophie. Anybody else that'd like to share a reflection before I maybe move on to the next question? I've got a question here from David from the Community Transport Association, which, in the interest of transparency, I have to say is also one of our new fantastic board members at CEIS. David, I think what David meant to say is everybody at CEIS so fantastic? But he seems to have mistyped that. And the question that we've got is, any lessons, James, from the partnership approach that's been taken with the Net Zero group, and how we can use that to shift funders' mindsets to prioritise social and economic value?
Yeah, I would think so. I've been involved with the sector now since 2006, and this is probably the initiative that I would say has the widest coming together and that I've experienced of organisations within the third sector, not just social enterprise, but the wider third sector. And secondly, bringing the funders on into this dialogue as well has been, I think, really beneficial, because we've now got an opportunity to align the third sector organisations with the support organisations with the funders across one continuum of solution, and I've not really seen that before. So I would hope that as each of the parties involved in that process has seen the benefits of doing so, that really will give us a foundation moving forward for any further subsequent challenges that come on board that require a kind of a broader perspective and solution.
Fantastic. I can confirm that wasn't a CEIS question planned just to try and make sure we get an answer that involved continuum of solution. But I'm sure everybody's glad to see that turn of phrase used. I think I'm going to open it up one more chance to the floor. If there are any other reflections or questions that anybody's got, and again, I'll prioritise wooing and selecting the questions just because of the makeup of the panel that we've got. I'm just looking for any electronic hands that might pop up in any of the other screens. All right, so in lieu of that, I'll maybe open up a question to the entirety of the audience, because I'm not sure that we necessarily have the answer, James, in the net zero work that we're doing. So there's a question there, I think, from David from the Social Enterprise Academy, asking if we know any organisations in Scotland which are social enterprises that are offering accredited carbon offsetting. I don't know if that's an answer that you've got, James, or anybody else that happens to be in the room.
I can't throw any names at you, but the discussion about carbon offsetting is part of the dialogue that we're having, and whether carbon offsetting should be, deemed to be a part of the solution or not. So I don't want to go into the intricacies of that dialogue just now, but I can tell you that as we develop the solution and look at how we carbon offsetting is one of the areas we're looking at, and posing a question against that at this point in time without giving you any indication of what the answers are.
Thanks, James. One of our trio of Davids has got his hands up. David Hood from Scotland. You're on mute. Well done.
Oh, thanks all. Yes, that's David, seems to be asking all the questions today. Yes, it was just to state that it's early doors yet, and I'm not the person in the Scotland project to talk to about this, but there is a serious carbon offset initiative on the go just now. I can pop the link up there. The website's a bit homey. It's been fair to my colleagues, but there are moves afoot to do some serious offsetting, because in fact the Scotland project sought to do its offsetting anyway, because as you may know, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies do have quite a large carbon footprint, and so we've offset all ours, and we've now been so enamoured with the whole process that we're opening it up to others. I can get more information on that, but there's moves afoot to help, and we hope to help other SES members as a fellow member and CIC ourselves.
Fantastic, thanks very much, David. Brian from Impact Hub Inverness, I think you had your hand up before moving on to Ron.
Hi. All right. We did our own carbon measuring last year. It wasn't difficult. One of our board members went off and did it. And the excess that we had to deal with, we did the deal with Trees for Life social enterprise, which operates throughout the Highlands Islands, and that's where now who knows whether in the long term we'll decide that carbon offsetting is a good thing to do or not. But at this time, it was the easy way to deal with it. We could also deal with CalMac and all of that oil that they use every time we go to an island. They're a bigger problem for us than anything else. We drive electric cars so that CalMac can pollute our air. That's a wee aside. Nice to see you all.
Thanks, Brian. Ron, I'm sorry that I've teed you up and I'm going to kind of cut you off here, but just following on for what I said earlier on, if it's okay, I'm just going to ask Matilda to come in first.
Yeah, I was just gonna build up on that. So as Brian said, I was about to mention Trees for Life, so the same as Brian. There's also the Woodland Trust, which has been doing really good work, so supporting community-owned woodland and doing offsetting. So all the land and community woodland are community-owned, and then they do carbon offsetting as well.
Thanks very much, Matilda. Ron?
Yeah, just to follow up on a comment that I put in the chat with James, that the Impact Investment Symposium, which ran throughout lockdown at Edinburgh Napier University, did some work on looking at the Woodland Carbon Code and aggregated bids for social enterprises, which opens up the opportunities for this to a lot of organisations who might not feel that they've got the scale or own the right amount of land. So we can definitely pick up James and David and others and kind of share that knowledge base and be part of the network to provide advice.
Fantastic, thanks very much. I think, folks, I've not seen any more questions in the chat. So, and just one last time, I'm going to put that out. If there's any other questions or reflections, and I think we'll probably bring today's events to a close. Chris has asked me to step in and close. They're dealing with a bit of a childcare issue in their household at the minute, so they're currently tag teaming in and out of various care and professional roles. So I'm going to step in for Chris for the moment. But are there any last reflections or any last questions from anybody? Fantastic. Thanks very much, folks. Well, I think the only thing that's should be said today is first and foremost, thanks very much to all the social enterprises here that were involved in filling out the census. If it wasn't for the kind of involvement in the sector, then this wouldn't happen. Thanks very much to all the folks that were involved in helping promote the census as well. I know a lot of the different organisations and a lot of the different networks helped get the word out there, and we wouldn't have had nearly 1,000 respondents if it wasn't for folks across the sector promoting this. Again, thanks to you all for giving your time today, for coming along and listening to us talk, and thanks to Davids and non-Davids who submitted questions as well, and thanks very much to my fellow folks on the panel. I haven't seen this many faces on a Zoom call for a long time, and just like to finish off by wishing all of you that I haven't done so far a happy new year, and hopefully it's going to be a bumper year for Scottish social enterprises, and I'll get the chance to meet all of you in person at some point during 2023. So thanks very much, folks.